Good afternoon, I'm DK Roster. Welcome to TTT Live. The United Nations has declared November 25 to December 10, 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This year, the global theme is Orange the World, Fund, Respond, Prevent, Collect. Today, the United Nations Population Fund, UNPF, is hosting a panel discussion on gender-based violence, and we're bringing it to you live on TTT, Talk City 91.1 FM, and on Facebook at TTT Live Online.
More than 1 billion lives are affected by gender-based violence. It affects women and girls, men and boys of all ages and in all places. It's time to create a safe world for all. We are with her. Are you?
Good afternoon. I am Asiya Mohammed, gender-based violence specialist with the United Nations Population Fund, which is the UN Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights Agency. I have the privilege of supporting the implementation of the joint European Union-United Nations Spotlight Initiative to eliminate violence against women and girls. Within the Caribbean, our focus is on family violence, for which UNFPA is one of the recipient UN organizations, and we work closely with the International Labour Organization, who is our associated agency. I have the privilege of being your host for today's discussion as we commemorate the United Nations 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence. Studies show that 1 in 3 women and girls experience violence in their lifetimes, and this has been exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic, with Trinidad and Tobago being no exception. We have heard and seen the spike in gender-based violence, known as the shadow pandemic, and while this occurs frequently in the home and is increasing in online spaces, violence and harassment, including domestic violence and sexual harassment, can also manifest in the workplace in the forms of absenteeism, low productivity, and lack of punctuality. Today's panel is brought to you as a collaboration between the United Nations Population Fund and the International Labour Organization. We are fortunate to have with us 5 distinguished panelists to provide their insights on this important issue. Ms. Sabina Gomez, the Chief Labour Relations Officer at the Ministry of Labour, who is with us in studio, Mr. Dennis Zulu, Director of the International Labour Organization Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean, Dr. Gabrielle Hussein, Deputy Chairman of the Equal Opportunity Commission via Zoom, Ms. Stephanie Fingal, Interim CEO of the Employers Consultative Association via Zoom, and Mr. Michael Anisette, General Secretary of the National Trade Union Center of Trinidad and Tobago, who is here with us in studio. Before I introduce Mr. Zulu, let's watch a brief video from the International Labour Organization on the C-190 Convention on Violence and Harassment, which was adopted last year as the ILO marked its 100-year anniversary.
This, ladies and gentlemen, was a historic opportunity to shape a future of work free from violence and harassment, and has presented you with instruments that are based on a human-centered approach, instruments that are practical, implementable, and therefore ratifiable.
It applies to the public and private sector, the formal and informal economy, and in urban and rural areas. Its scope is indeed broad, but so is the reach of violence and harassment in the world of work.
Every person in the world of work should feel that this convention and recommendation applies to them. It also demonstrates the value, the power of tripartitism and the role the ILO can play to help improve people's working lives.
Employers want to see harmonious and productive workplaces, and violent and harassing behaviours place that at risk. Nobody should be subjected to violence and harassment at work.
This is really a groundbreaking convention. This is the first time that we have standards that say very clearly what violence and harassment is, that it has not to be tolerated, what to do about it.
The enthusiasm, the excitement which attended the adoption of these instruments does testimony to the fact that they can, and I'm very confident will, make a difference to the working life of very many people around the world.
I congratulate you on adopting the Convention on Violence and Harassment in the World of Work.
And to speak more to us today about C190, we have with us Mr. Dennis Zulu. Mr. Zulu previously worked as director for the ILO country office in Abuja, with responsibility for Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and as representative to ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. He has led development projects on employment creation, entrepreneurship development, microfinance, and social dialogue, and has worked as the UN advisor on youth employment and empowerment to the Liberian government. He brings extensive experience and knowledge to the ILO Caribbean office. And now we welcome Mr. Zulu. Mr. Zulu, over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me on this very important program. And the fact that we've shown the video is, I think, a very important entry point in terms of illustrating the work that the ILO does in as far as the prevention of harassment and violence in the workplace is concerned. Just like the video stated, last year we passed a comprehensive and a landmark convention, which is commonly referred to as Convention 190, and with it came Recommendation 206. Now, these are basically instruments that the ILO puts in place to guide member states such as Trinidad and Tobago and many others in putting into place policy and legislation against practices which are not acceptable in the workplace. And the fact that we've recognized that violence and harassment in the workplace is a very serious issue, and I think we are highlighted to that in some of the statistics that you presented. Therefore, made it possible for countries across the world who are members of the ILO to come together and put in place this very important convention. Now, what really happens is the ILO prescribes what are called minimum international labor standards, and these are the standards that member states are supposed to adhere to. And every workplace, therefore, must adhere to through national legislation, which is passed by governments such as that of Trinidad and Tobago. In this case, Convention 190 is a landmark one because it deals with the issue of harassment and violence in the workplace, which normally are quite obvious, but very little people talk about. So what the convention does is prescribe certain actions that member states can take through national law, through policy, through actions such as programs to eliminate harassment and violence in the workplace. One interesting part of the convention is that the fact that it deals with violence and harassment in one definition, because most often than not, we see these as two separate issues. But it's been realized in the workplace that sometimes there's actually a continuum either way. It could start off with harassment and end up with violence, or start off with violence and end up with harassment. So the convention takes that into account in the way it describes what this is, basically unacceptable behaviors which are not really acceptable in the workplace. And some of these behaviors really have to do with gender, as correctly stated, because we understand that gender harassment and violence is probably the most significant of all types of violence, hence the link to that. Secondly, the convention also prescribes or takes into account that harassment and violence does not just take place in the formal workplace as we know it, and COVID has actually revealed to us that a workplace is basically everywhere, and therefore you could be working at home and be a subject of harassment and violence in your own home. So it takes into account that can happen there as well, and puts into place or proposes measures that national governments can take in order to deal with those. The other thing that is very interesting about the convention is the fact that we do understand that harassment and violence can take place at any time and location. So if you're an employee and you're being harassed on your way home on the bus, for instance, that itself is something that should be dealt with. So it takes care of that as well and prescribes certain things that need to be done in dealing with these issues or these vices, as we may call them. So really the convention is there to ensure and play a role in supporting governments to put into place legislation, policies, but also to ensure that capacity is built, usually through the ministries of labor's inspectorates, to be able to go out there and ensure that whatever harassment or violence that's taking place is brought to a halt. The ILO works very closely with employers' organizations and workers' organizations as well. So it's also incumbent on these organizations, and we work very closely with them to ensure that workers know about their rights, and therefore that even in instances, because this has been highlighted as one of the issues where sometimes workers do not really understand that they're being harassed or violated. So it's important to sensitize workers into this effect, but also it's important to get employers to appreciate the fact that whatever actions that may take or may be construed to be violence and harassment should not happen, and there should be ways and grievance procedures put in place to stop this from happening. So some of the things that we're doing at the moment is trying to work in the Caribbean, first of all, to ensure that we sensitize all partners on the need to ratify, because ratification is the first process. So when a country ratifies a convention, then this has to be domesticated into national law. And going forward, this law then has to be enforced by local authorities through the inspectorates, with the Ministry of Labour, but also it can happen through the employers and workers' organizations. Beyond the ratification, it's important also to have the capacity to ensure compliance through the law enforcement agencies, have programs in place to educate workers, but also to ensure that everybody's on board towards ensuring the elimination of harassment and violence in the workplace. We do understand this is a very serious problem, and hence the need for us to work very closely with governments in the Caribbean to ensure that this is curtailed. And most significantly, as I said, violence can happen most significantly against gender, leading to harmful effects, both physically, psychologically, and economically. And therefore, this can impact on the productivity of the workplace, hence the need for us to put in place measures to stop this. So it's indeed something that we're working on at the moment, and we're looking forward to partnering the ministries of labor, including that of Trinidad and Tobago, have done a tremendous job on this effect already. The employers' organizations and workers, and indeed everybody that's concerned, civil society, because this really is a task that cannot be handled by a few. It has to be a whole integrated approach and very comprehensive to the effect if we're going to achieve the results that we desire. So thank you so much.
Very comprehensive presentation, Mr. Zulu. It is very encouraging to note that C190 recognizes everyone's right to live in a world of work free from violence and harassment, including gender-based violence and harassment, and that violence and harassment constitutes a human rights violation, impacting a person's psychological, physical, and sexual health, dignity, and family. What you highlighted about the convention requiring the ratifying states to recognize the impact of domestic violence on the workplace and to mitigate it is also crucial, as we know that while domestic violence itself takes place outside the workplace, it could also affect workplaces in terms of low productivity and absenteeism. I recall here the domestic violence in the workplace policy launched last year by the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce and Industry in collaboration with the Coalition Against Domestic Violence. In fact, earlier this year, 31-year-old Nai Singh was shot by her estranged husband outside her workplace, who then killed himself. So this makes what you just said and what you spoke to much more important. Thank you, Mr. Zulu. I also note that under C190, governments have an important responsibility to promote an environment of zero tolerance to violence and harassment. And so this brings me to segue to our next speaker, Ms. Sabina Gomez is presently employed as a Chief Labor Relations Officer within the Conciliation Advisory and Advocacy Division of the Ministry of Labor. She is certified by the International Labour Organization as a trainer in conciliation, mediation, and as a facilitator in joint union management negotiations. Sabina holds a master's in mediation, a bachelor's in management studies, and a certificate in public administration from the University of the West Indies.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Further on Mr. Zulu's statement, which was very comprehensive, it took everything into a nutshell. We want to focus on the national policy, and persons would say, okay, why a national policy on sexual harassment in Trinidad and Tobago? Now, it's a workplace policy, and it was felt necessary to establish a workplace policy to address issues of sexual harassment in the workplace. It's the place where we spend most of our hours, working hours, we spend it at work, and we build relationships. And it was felt that there was a need to have or develop a framework where it will define what is sexual harassment in the workplace and give guidelines for resolving sexual harassment issues that would arise in the workplace. The policy also speaks to the development of legislation that will render sexual harassment in the workplace illegal, and provide for issues of sexual harassment to be dealt with, on its own merit and its own right. Because as of today, we treat with issues of sexual harassment through a right that may have been violated in the workplace. The worker may have tendered her resignation and claimed to be constructively dismissed because of the sexual harassment abuse in the workplace, or the worker may have been suspended or demoted. So these are the issues that have been brought to the fore. And as early as 1995, there was the Republic Bank and Bank Employees Union judgment, which Justice Bernard spoke to so eloquently in looking at sexual harassment as really being offensive. So in establishing the sexual harassment policy, the ministry undertook consultation. It was a consultative process. We call it a tripartite plus, because it was not only the tripartite of government, employer, and trade union, but it was extended to NGOs. It was a broad cross-section of the population that took part in this consultation. In Tobago, they looked at what happened in churches. They looked at entertainers. So, the focus was wide and broad, and persons in the community really came out and gave their point of view. Right. So now in the policy, we define sexual harassment. Now, it's not legislation would be or shall I say, we look forward to the legislation that will properly define or give us a definition of what sexual harassment is. But so far as we have a definition, I think that was approved by the ILO. So we use that definition in the policy. And it states, if I could just mention a few pointers, is any physical, verbal, or non-verbal conduct of a sexual nature and other conduct affecting the dignity of men and women in the workplace. Now, that is something that not only takes place with women, but it takes place with men also, and we want to stress that. We don't want persons to feel that, we develop a policy that is anti-men or, it's against men, because it happens to both male and female. And we have had cases come through the ministry, through our conciliation process, where both men and women came forward. We had cases with female and female, male and male. So it was across the board, whether vertical or horizontal position. So we have had the whole gambit in terms of who and sexual harassment could apply to. Now, after the policy, we look forward to implementing, because, you know, so many times we have policies or we create policies and the implementation is lacking. So I am pleased to say that, you know, Cabinet, you know, did approve an implementation plan that we could implement the policy, because it requires extensive education, promotion, and, you know, it's something that the ministry really cannot do on its own, because it's a collaborative approach. We have the Equal Opportunities Commission. They have done their part in producing the guidelines. So it's sometimes because, you know, we have cases coming at us and say, well, have you heard? And it's like part of the population that you would, you know, they haven't heard about it, or they don't know that they have rights that they could exercise. So it's an extensive amount of promotion and education that needs to take place. Now, part of the implementation of the policy, we have a hotline, 800 card, that we want to establish, and it's specifically for sexual harassment issues, that persons could feel comfortable calling this hotline and really speaking to someone who will be able to, you know, clearly assist them, identify the issues, you know, and probably even guide them or empower them in terms of what they should do in the workplace. And within the policy itself, you know, we have a form that persons, if they feel that, you know, they were sexually harassed in the workplace, they in turn could take that page and fill it out and probably carry it into the employer. Now, the policy speaks to having a designated person, a confidential person, because it is just an allegation. Now, there could be false allegations as well made against someone. So that is something that we are mindful of, that, you know, reputations could be ruined. So that is why we stress in the policy that, look, we want employers to identify, you create your own policies within your organization, and we want you to identify a designated person, someone who is confidential. You know, sometimes you will go into, you have some HR units, you walk into them, you have a complaint, and by the time you leave, the entire organization is aware of what transpired. And, you know, the ability to investigate, the person will have already been castigated, blame laid, and no investigation has taken place. So that is something that we are mindful of. And we are hoping that, you know, legislation will be able to take care of that. We want to have a campaign with schools, because we realize that young girls and young women, it starts from somewhere. So at an early age, we should encourage our girls and our boys to speak up, because this level of silence, and you see it when persons come before you and you say, well, why didn't you say something, or what did you do? And they did nothing, probably out of fear, probably out, I'm going to lose my job. And, you know, so we are mindful that jobs are hard to come by, you know, and the perpetrators would be, or the alleged perpetrators would be aware that, you know, a job is something hard to come by. So that would account for silence on the part of some persons in terms of coming forward. Now, we had a joint select committee set up on to discuss the whole issue of sexual harassment and violence in the workplace. And one of the things that came out of that, they spoke about, you know, bystander training, you know, persons who observe and, you know, you could observe and not do anything, or you could observe and empower the person, or you could observe and, you know, really, and that ties into legislation where, the name of the legislation, where persons are encouraged, you know, to come forward and anonymously, you know, say something if they feel that it is damaging the person, because that could also lead to mental stress, you know, lack of productivity. Persons don't want to come to work because this person is still on the job and they are afraid to speak up, or they have been, when you look at the dimensions of sexual harassment, quid pro quo, or hostile working environment, it could either happen in both ways. So sometimes you look for elements in terms of whether the person make a report or of sexual harassment, and then what transpired afterwards. Sometimes it becomes a living hell for the person who actually speaks out, you may find that they may be demoted, or they may be put under steps to sit, or their jobs, their functions may be taken away from them, or the atmosphere could become hostile. Sometimes even their co-workers would turn against them in terms of how dare you go and say this is my friend. So sometimes you find organizations are split in two in terms of sides are being taken. So all of these are, the effects of sexual harassment in the workplace. And it affects persons' mental ability, especially where they feel that they have made a report and the report is not being investigated. And they have no choice but to stay there and see the person every day, and sometimes even being the butt of jokes or taunts by their fellow co-workers who would have taken the side of the other person, or it may be the owner of the company who is doing it. And then who do you report to? If it's the owner, there's nobody else you can report to. So in those cases, you may find that the worker would have no choice but to leave the job or to resign from the job. And so all of these things are occurrence, and we are hoping that with this policy that we would be able to educate, and we have started. As soon as the policy was laid, we have done, with social media, we have done in terms of media, and also meeting with employers, ministries. And this is a program that was halted a bit because of COVID, but within the new year, we are having webinar series that we want to go all out and really educate persons, educate employers, that you must investigate if a claim is made, you must have a designated person, and you must have policy, you must develop your policy. Now, some organizations, especially where there's a recognized majority union, we realize that the unions have been in the forefront in that it is included in their collective agreement. So those were discussions that would have been taken place jointly between the employer and the trade union, and they would have come up with articles in terms of how to address sexual harassment, and bullying. So now it's just a matter of really firming up that the articles within the policy to make sure that it stays within the national guideline, the national policy. So it's a lot of work to do, and it requires, persons, a collaborative effort. We have also now, even coming up with the policy itself, we joined with the Office of the Prime Minister because they had an internal policy, and we met with them and we incorporated part of their internal policy into our overall national policy because they had some really good features in their policy that we think it would benefit the national community. So we just are appreciative of this forum where we can get to share as to the work that we are doing, and we want to continue in that light, and we just want to tell persons that there's help outside there, so they don't need to feel hopeless and helpless when things are taking place in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gomez, for sharing that very important information on the psychological challenges faced by survivors of sexual harassment, and also on the objectives and implementation of the National Workplace Policy on Sexual Harassment in Trinidad and Tobago. It is indeed very encouraging to know that a national public awareness campaign is planned and that a national hotline, 800-CAAD, was established to provide support to those experiencing sexual harassment, enabling them to lodge complaints. So we're very, very grateful, and we look forward to the drafting of this legislation. And I also take into account your point of those who are most vulnerable to sexual harassment, whether it's young people, young women, whether it's migrants, etc. On the point of legislation and legal recourse, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Gabrielle Hussein, Vice Chairwoman of the Equal Opportunity Commission. Dr. Hussein is a member of the Spotlight Initiative's Civil Society National Reference Group, and she's also the head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies. Over to you, Dr. Hussain.
Thank you so much, Asiya. And it's really a pleasure to see the kind of passion to build in protection from sexual harassment into workers' rights in expanded ways. For your viewers to know, first of all, I mean, we've had excellent discussion on what is sexual harassment. There is something that I want to emphasize, and that is the fact that sexual harassment is really defined by the fact that it is unwanted, unwelcomed sexual advances or requests for sexual favors or, any conduct of a sexual nature. And those words, unwanted and unwelcome, are so important because very often we are described as living in a society that is sexualized, in which these kinds of comments are made, but that is not a justification. And I think, making those kinds of interventions is so important. I think also that it's not even about what somebody intended. And so it is very much about the way that a particular behavior was experienced, whether it created feelings of humiliation, intimidation, whether it was considered offensive, whether it happened in circumstances and with a frequency that any reasonable person could agree constitutes sexual harassment. And it's so important in workplaces that we speak out and say, this is making me uncomfortable, and know at that moment that it is very clear that what is happening has indeed been identified as unwanted behavior. And I think having those very ordinary conversations with workers and employers so that we know how to name these things is a starting point. In Trinidad and Tobago, we don't have standalone sexual harassment legislation the way that Barbados and Belize does, for example. But as previous speakers have said, we rely and are guided by conventions. The Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, which, particularly in these 16 days of activism to end gender-based violence, CEDAW is such an important convention because it really is the overarching global Bill of Rights to prevent discrimination against women. And takes these issues of gender-based and sexual violence into consideration. We're also guided by the International Labour Organization conventions that have been discussed, including Convention 190 on violence and harassment. And also, it's important for the population to know that we are guided by case law in the Industrial Relations Court, common law, but also different legislation, such as, for example, the Sexual Offences Act, the Offences Against the Person Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, and of course, the Equal Opportunity Act. So, I think it's important to take a moment to just continue to educate the public about what the Equal Opportunity Act seeks to achieve. The Equal Opportunity Act aims to protect all persons from discrimination and victimization on the basis of particular categories of status. Those are, for example, discrimination on the basis of race or ethnicity, sex, religion, for example, marital status, place of origin, and of course, disability. Now, the position of the Equal Opportunity Commission, and indeed much global precedent, is that sexual harassment is a form of discrimination on the basis of sex. And that is because a person's sex is one of the motivating factors in whether or not they have experienced such sexual harassment. So the Equal Opportunity Commission's role is to oversee implementation of the Act as it seeks to create a national space and community that is characterized by non-discrimination and is characterized by greater equality in opportunity. Complaints of sexual harassment have been brought to the Equal Opportunity Commission over the last years. However, I think it's really important for the public to know right now that the Equal Opportunity Tribunal has held that sexual harassment cannot be a form of discrimination on the basis of sex. This decision is now at the Court of Appeal, and when the Equal Opportunity Commission, and after that decision comes from the Court of Appeal, the Equal Opportunity Commission would be able to continue to receive complaints of sexual harassment and be able to offer redress and remedy through ways beyond just conciliation. It's so important that while we consider the importance of standalone sexual harassment legislation, that we keep in mind that those who have complaints can take the route of civil litigation in terms of a breach of contract against an employer for failing to create a safe workplace. You know, through a union, as other speakers have said, those complaints can go to the Industrial Relations Court as well. And we will be able to return to the Equal Opportunity Commission as a site for redress following the judgment. But litigation routes can be expensive, can require lawyers. And one of the benefits of the Equal Opportunity Commission as a site for redress and remedy is that it doesn't require such legal costs, and that it is a much more publicly accessible site of remedy because the Equal Opportunity Commission investigates and makes recommendations. And I think that's very important for those workers who may not be represented by unions and who may not have the financial ability to seek justice. So on the one hand, it's one of the things that the Equal Opportunity Commission is seeking to do is to make recommendations to the Honorable AG to revisit the Equal Opportunity Act, and in particular to amend the definition of sex in the Act to include sexual harassment, so that sexual harassment will be included under sex as a form of discrimination, and of course to create definitions for sexual harassment. We support and are contributing to standalone legislation on sexual harassment as exists in other countries. And we are also trying to advise employers to create their own workplace codes. The Equal Opportunity Commission created guidelines for employers to create workplace policies on sexual harassment. Those guidelines are freely downloadable on the website, and it offers training, it offers support to employers and to workplaces to develop and institutionalize those guidelines. On the one hand, standalone legislation is absolutely key. On the other hand, it is also important for us to see that we can be guided by a legislative framework that already identifies sexual harassment as inappropriate and as offensive and as intolerable. As well, I think it's important for us to keep the Equal Opportunity Commission in mind as an institution built for the people of Trinidad and Tobago to be able to protect themselves from discrimination and to seek redress in ways that are financially accessible and in ways that feel inclusive. We are, of course, also recommending that the protection from discrimination be expanded to include other categories of status, such as age, health status, and sexual orientation. And I think that that's extremely important because all persons in workplaces, on their way to workplaces, coming from workplaces, can experience sexual harassment, regardless of their sex, their gender, or their sexual orientation. And all citizens, all workers indeed, need to be protected from this form of violence, this form of gender-based violence. And I think those are the kinds of key information, sets of information that the population needs at this time. Sexual harassment is a form of gender-based violence in the sense that, and this is important for the population to know, our beliefs and values about manhood and womanhood shape the way we see each other and treat each other as sexual beings, shape the way that women, for example, are considered to be feminine and sexual and are sexualized in our society, and the way that that then affects them in workplaces. We know that anyone can experience sexual harassment, men and women. We know that women experience sexual harassment to a much greater degree, and that's because of the gender ideologies that we live in that associate women with access to their femininity and sexuality. We also know that sexual harassment can take place amongst those of unequal power and status in a workplace, as well as those of similar power and status in a workplace. But overall, I think the message I'd like to leave your audience with today is that if you are in a workplace, if you're going to work, coming from work, and you are experiencing unwanted comments, unwanted jokes, sexually suggestive questions, sexually suggestive written content, or sexually suggestive calls, you're experiencing sexual advances that seek to grant favors or are threatening to withhold your rights in some way as a worker, are threatening to create punishments if sexual advances are not reciprocated, including denying of deserved economic benefits. All of those are forms of sexual harassment. We all know them well. Few of us have never encountered them in our lives. And the goal of ending sexual harassment and protecting us all from it is to end the way that workplaces can be made hostile and offensive and intimidating and unfair, and to create places where the right to a livelihood can be accessed safely and free from violence.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hussain. You raised some very, very important points there about the need for sexual harassment legislation, but also about public awareness so that everyone in Trinidad and Tobago, the population, is very aware about what legal recourse they have, whether through civil litigation, etc. And so now with me, we have one of our very eloquent speakers to really speak to the practical implementation of a national workplace policy on sexual harassment, and really to follow Dr. Hussain's comments in terms of how are we going to implement this national workplace policy in the workplace, and how do we get companies and businesses to come on board, because we know we can have conventions, we can have policies, and we can have legislation, but implementation is key, and that is where the impact lies. I now have the privilege of welcoming Ms. Stephanie Fingal. Ms. Fingal's human resources and industrial relations practice spans 31 years with significant experience in the financial services industry. She is the interim CEO of the Employers Consultative Association. A past vice chair of the Minimum Wages Board, Ms. Fingal is a key employer representative at fora of the Ministry of Labour and national consultations on development of labour policy and legislation. She holds a bachelor's in management and history from the University of the West Indies, a certificate in advanced mediation from the University of Windsor, and an HR Director Certificate from Cornell University School of Industrial and Labour Relations. Welcome, Ms. Fingal.
Good afternoon, and thank you, everyone. And everyone has set the stage for what we are about to speak from at the ECA. So in sharing about the activities to be undertaken by the ECA and the perspectives held in ushering our employers into the Spotlight Initiative, I would like to start by saying that we submit to the belief that all human beings are created equal. With this in mind, we are unequivocally certain that all human beings deserve to be treated with respect and to live safe and secure lives within their families, communities, and workplaces, and that includes females. Our constitution under Section 4, Trinidad and Tobago's constitution, also in part provides for the right of the individual to life, liberty, security of the person, and enjoyment of property. In employment terms, we consider salary as property. And my interpretation of this right is that employees, including men and women, that is, human beings of the female sex, are constitutionally entitled to be able to earn salaries without having to fear for their security of person while doing so. This brings us to the issue of eliminating violence and sexual harassment in the workplace, which, as we just heard, is a real and prominent occurrence in Trinidad and Tobago. The question we can ask is, why is it important for us to work towards ending these occurrences? For business, it is important that we do not focus on sexual harassment in isolation, but as part of our corporate social responsibility for the promotion of human rights within our workplaces and, by extension, our country. As we are aware, employers and employees are responsible for ensuring a safe and healthy work environment and the well-being of all employees. Females not accepted. So I think the buck stops with the employer when it comes to ensuring such protection. And one may ask, so what about the responsibility of the employee for his own safety and well-being, which is also covered under our OSH Act? But the reality is that this responsibility cannot be fully realized outside of clear and communicated policies and guidelines within the workplace, and the employer is therefore responsible for that. We also know that where employees' safety and health and well-being are left unchecked and steps are not taken to mitigate possible fallout, employers are held liable, as someone said earlier, for failing to ensure a safe environment by employees, for employees in proven cases of harassment, that's sexual harassment. And such outcomes can be costly for employers, as we know, financially and sometimes reputationally. And that said, workplace policies must be fair. While the employer is responsible, employees also have responsibility. So policies must be fair and provide for the treatment of false claims as well, as such claims have the potential to erode trust within the workplace, which in turn impacts employer-employee relationships, employee and employee relationships, and by extension, overall workplace productivity, sometimes resulting in unjustified family breakups. And we know that the longer-term impact of these situations include broken children, and down the road, broken and unproductive adults, and therefore unproductive employees. So employers have a vested interest in working and supporting the initiatives that we will be going about trying to implement in ensuring that our society and their business places survive. So it's about sustainability as well as securing the safety of individuals, women in particular. So additionally, where the harasser is a key man or a highly skilled employee of a business operation, an employer may experience low to zero output should dismissal of that individual be the outcome of any case in which he's involved, any harassment case that is. So sexual harassment in the workplace affects productivity and profitability, even sometimes by one offender who is critical to the needs of that organization. As the ECA, we are eager to get all employers on board by encouraging them to value the returns on their investment in employee safety and well-being through formal, documented, simple but comprehensive and unambiguous policies on sexual harassment in the workplace. And these are policies that will inform female employees of their right to work in a free and secure environment, understand what is sexual harassment, reporting cases of sexual harassment, finding out where and how to seek protection from perpetrators, as well as knowledge about the channels that are available to them for helping them to recover from such harassment. In reaching out to employers, the ECA will place focus on the potential high legal and reputational costs associated with sexual harassment claims that reach the courts or, in the future, the Equal Opportunity Tribunal. For we see this issue as critical, since money spent in pursuing and settling sexual harassment disputes could well be directed towards improvement in company infrastructure and employee development, which can only redound to the benefit of the business and the employees. So business is really looking at this from an investment point of view, a return on investment, securing safety, and promoting the national good and a long-term prosperity of employees and citizens. Another business impact of sexual harassment is absenteeism, as someone mentioned, and punctuality, loss of man hours, as well as rising health plan and EAP costs, especially where female employees are being sexually harassed at work and may absent themselves through fear of facing the perpetrator, or perhaps having to frequently access health plan benefits by visiting the doctor and counselors at EAP sessions in trying to deal with ongoing harassment. Employers must therefore consider the fact that sexual harassers may themselves be past victims of abuse, and we know that is also a reality. So any workplace policy being developed must include clear provisions for dealing with their rehabilitation, and that's those who perhaps have problems of their own and find themselves becoming a harasser in the workplace. And that should include disciplinary action, sometimes accompanied by counseling in minor cases, or it might result in outright dismissal depending on the gravity of the offense. And so clear guidelines and clear consequences must be enunciated by an employer in developing a policy and in promoting safety and security for females within the workplace. We acknowledge, of course, that sexual harassment can be directed against males, but as we have just heard, it's principally directed towards females. In ending the cycle of violence and sexual harassment within the workplace, employers must therefore be prepared to cooperate with the law and not try to hide serious offenses and protect offenders. That too is a reality, transferring an employee from one place to the next to cover for his offenses. We have to decide that that should not continue. The risk associated with such concealment are high: legal costs, reputational damage, as I said before, loss of employee trust, and even perhaps loss of customer trust, where the issue is aired publicly and can be known by all. In closing, I'd like to say that in upholding and promoting the rights and freedoms of all persons, employers must begin to practically and consistently apply to all areas of their business operations the corporate values that their organization espouses. Often we have corporate values espoused, but not acted upon or not applied in the day-to-day operations of a business, including the treatment and security of employees. So that this includes the respect for the individual and individual accountability. Every single individual is accountable to the other. And therefore, sexual harassment in the workplace is a failing on the part of an individual to be accountable to his colleague and to another employee within the workplace. And in so doing, and that is, of course, regardless of the job status, we are aware that people meet and fall in love at workplaces. But the problem of sexual harassment, that is unwelcome sexual advances and abuse by those often holding the reins of power in organizations, it is real and it did not occur overnight. For this reason, we acknowledge that it cannot be remedied overnight. Notwithstanding, we strongly believe that the power element of sexual harassment in the workplace can be eliminated over time, as well as the scourge of intimidation, fear, despair, and loss of property. But this can happen only with genuine and bold commitment by employers and related stakeholders, such as those of us on this call today. With this in mind, the ECA stands ready to partner with the UNFPA and supported by the ILO to accomplish the goals of the Spotlight Initiative project over the next 8 months, and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Fingal, for that excellent presentation. We very much appreciate all the comments you made, particularly in terms of speaking to businesses, speaking to corporate social responsibility, speaking to some of the costs associated with sexual harassment. And the UNFPA and ILO are very, very pleased to support the ECA and to support NATUC through our joint European Union, United Nations Spotlights initiative. And finally, I have the privilege to welcome Mr. Michael Anisat. But before I introduce Mr. Anisat, let's watch a brief video from the National Trade Union Center of Trinidad and Tobago for UNFPA's I Am a GBV Disruptor social media campaign to commemorate the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence.
Hi, I am Ria Ralph Watson, and I'm a mother of 2 beautiful girls. I reside in the lovely island of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm a member of the National Trade Union Center. I believe in women empowering women. I am a GBV disruptor.
Abuse comes in many forms, and it's important that we as women recognize it and seek appropriate help wherever necessary.
I am Felicia Thomas, proud Trinidadian, a member of the National Trade Union Center, a voice for the voiceless, an advocate for women's rights, and I am a GBV disruptor.
Hi, I'm Peter Ambrose from Trinidad and Tobago. I make sure my daughter is part of a generation educated, fearless, and empowered. I am a GBV disruptor.
My name is Michael Anisat from Trinidad and Tobago, representative of the National Trade Union Center. I'm a proud father, I'm a grandfather and a great-grandfather. So I speak with authority when I say any form of violence against women and children is a violence against humanity. I therefore call on the world to condemn any form of violence against women. I say power to women, I say power to the children, I say power to the mothers, because women are the mothers of the earth. And when we offend women, we offend the earth. I am therefore a GBV disruptor.
We are from Trinidad and Tobago. We are GBV disruptors.
Thank you so much, NATUC and Mr. Michael Anisat, for that wonderful video. This is definitely an auspicious occasion to be here together, all working on this very important issue of sexual harassment in the workplace. Mr. Michael Anisat is the President General of the Seamen and Waterfront Workers Trade Union. He is also the General Secretary of the National Trade Union Center of Trinidad and Tobago and General Secretary of the Caribbean Congress of Labour. Mr. Anisat is the Vice Chair of the International Transport Workers Federation for Latin America and the Caribbean region, and is also a member of the Offshore Task Force International Negotiating Group. Mr. Anisat has been actively involved in the trade union movement for over 35 years and has served on numerous local, national, regional, and international workers' federations and unions. Welcome, Mr. Anisat.
Good day. First, allow me to thank the UNFPA and the ILO for giving the National Trade Union Center this opportunity to be part of this space where we speak of a serious issue that affects women in the workplace. And as we say in the National Trade Union Center, the mother of the earth. Allow me to also express my thanks to all the panelists who would have done some meaningful and incisive expressions on this particular issue. But from the National Trade Union perspective and from a workers' perspective, the first point that we will want to make in the context of what we are talking about is that we see education, all right, as the most transformational force It is a force that you cannot take away from anybody. And therefore, it is one of the greatest equalizers. And from that context, the issue of educating not only our women folks, but also our children and the men in particularly, given our cultural antecedents, given our cultural norms, where this machoism is part of our culture, where the right to have how many women, and if you whistle a lady or suitor and she feels offended, that seems to be something that is wrong. And those are some of the fundamental issues in the trade union movement that we believe that we must take a look at. And how do we go about this? How do we go about this? We have spoken about the Convention 109. We have spoken about the Recommendation 206. But from where we sit in the National Trade Union Center, the history is that conventions or laws does not necessarily transform into the meaningful changes that is required. And that is why we are saying that education has to be the first platform where you educate men to understand what is happening, where you educate children, both boys and girls, so that you can have that development over an extended period of time that is necessary. I mean, one of our cultures, and I grew up under this culture, that the boys were allowed to play and only carry out the garbage, but your sisters had to do everything, wash, clean, and it inculcates in your mind a level of superiority that goes into your lifestyle, that goes into the workplace. And therefore, we believe in the National Trade Union Center that issue of educating our membership and the general population becomes necessary. We believe that you have to hold a magnifying glass, all right, against violence in the workplace, violence against women, gender-based violence. You must hold that magnifying glass and hold everybody accountable. And we must understand as a people, as a country, as a society, that changes don't start with legislation. Changes actually start with you. It's like the man in the mirror. And therefore, the changes, if we have to make any meaningful or substantial changes, we believe that it has to start with the individual. And therefore, we welcome the initiative of the ILO and the UNFPA, because that will afford us the opportunity, given the initiative that we are launching, to do the kind of work, to do the kind of adaptation that is necessary, that speaks to our realities, that will be rooted in our culture, in who we are, and therefore send the message that is necessary to avoid violence or harassment in the workplace. And I just want to add a particular experience, because we talk about workplace violence, but we do not talk about the violence or the harassment, sexual, that is, where it comes from the highest level of the management team. Because we would have experienced that. We would have had, as the trade union movement, to intervene in a particular company. And I'm not going to call the company, but Trinidad and Tobago is aware of what I'm talking about. And it was at the highest level. And the results, with all the policies that we spoke and we had in place, that because of the level of that seniority of that particular individual at a board level, the persons who were part of blowing the whistle, they were fired. And that's a reality. So I want to put that on the table. How do we address that particular issue? Because we are talking about workplace, but it goes beyond the workplace in our view, given our experiences in the context of the National Trade Union Center and in the context of our union. And I think that is necessary. And then we are saying, therefore, that training of the union negotiating team to recognize special measures for victims of gender-based violence must become part of the new dispensation of the trade union movement. The trade union movement must not be seen as a movement that is only responsible for collective bargaining and dispute. We must transform ourselves into what I want to call a social movement that speaks to truth, that speaks power to the truth, that speaks to the voice of the voiceless. And therefore, all those issues that we never used to see as fundamental issues are issues that we, as the trade union movement, must now take on as an organization, because we are the equalizers too, in the context that we can work with the Employers Consultative Association in order, as the trade union movement and the representative of employers, to put together a package or a thought process or even training that will empower not only the workforce, but bring knowledge to the senior managers that speaks to this whole issue of gender-based violence. And one must pay attention to something here. Is 1 in 3 women experience some form of violence, and some at home. And those are fundamental issues. And therefore, our commitment from the National Trade Union Center is to work with the UNFPA, to work with the ILO, to work with all social partners, and to work with the ECA to ensure that as Trinidad and Tobago, we make the workplace safe, and not only the workplace, but Trinidad and Tobago safe for all women and all children of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anisat. Very much appreciate your presentation, your thoughts, extremely powerful. So you highlight a very important issue. We have conventions at the international level that Mr. Zulu would have spoken to. We have a national workplace policy on sexual harassment. We have guidelines for sexual harassment at the Equal Opportunity Commission. So now I have a question to all the panelists. What are the steps your organization is taking to make workplaces free from sexual harassment or violence in Trinidad and Tobago? And the reason I ask this question is because there is a gap. We have the conventions, we have the policies, but as the example Mr. Anisat so eloquently referenced, we still have, despite the policies, despite the conventions that exist under the ILO, we still have cases of sexual harassment happening. Currently, we may have persons experiencing sexual harassment looking at today's panel discussion. So what are the steps that your organization can take to eliminate sexual harassment or violence in the workplace? To all the panelists, anyone who would like to go first? Sure, please, Mr. Anisat.
From
yes.
the National Trade Union perspective and also from the Cipriani Labour College, because we will have partnered with the Cipriani Labour College in this initiative. The issue of prioritizing, in our view, the rights and safety of women and girls, not only in the workplace, but as a general fundamental principle of what I want to call of who we are as a people, must become fundamental. Because while we understand legislation, but if you don't have that, what I want to call cultural change and thinking in our minds in terms of the respect for women and what that means for a society and what is reflective of who we are as a society, I don't think with the greatest of respect that legislation alone will solve that particular problem.
Thank you, Mr. Anisat. Ms. Gomez?
Yes, I agree with that, and that is when I spoke about our implementation plan, because after the policy, what's next? And part of our implementation plan, because based on our interaction with persons who would have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace, and one of the key components of our implementation plan is a national public awareness campaign in terms of educating and promoting. And I think Mr. Anisat touched on it in terms of, young girls and boys, the ability to speak up. For too long, our young women, sometimes when they're in front of you, young boys, they hold their head down and, they're not able to articulate a position. And in terms of our educating them are not when they reach in the workplace, but also at the schools at the young level, for them to have knowledge as to what is sexual harassment or even what is not right and wrong. So we feel that at the school level, it's primary, secondary, that the outreach should start from there and not when you reach on the workplace. Because when you reach on the workplace, you would have already been socialized to be quiet when things are taking place, not being able to speak up. So I agree with Mr. Anisette in terms of public awareness campaign, educating the members of the public, educating the workforces, and even educating the trade union officers, the branch representatives, so that they could really handle cases that come to them. Also, the campaign with the school Speak Up campaign, because it is so prevalent, having the hotline where a safe space where somebody could call in. So those are some of the features that we have in terms of implementing the plan, right? And it has to go across all sectors. And each one of us here on the panel will have a part to play because we cannot do it alone.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Gomez. And any of our panelists on Zoom, would you like to add a contribution?
Yes. I think let me just one contribution. I think all what has been said by panelists is extremely important. Just to emphasize that they just having laws and policies like Mr. Anisette has said is not sufficient. I mean, it goes beyond that. And you recall that I said that it needs the considered efforts of each one of us working together. First of all, to sensitize, to educate, to ensure that the government or the partners have the capacity to understand what these issues are. But also, I think it's important also for workers themselves to be well aware, because sometimes the lack of knowledge on what the law provides in terms of their protection could be an inhibitor, and the fact that the workers are protected under the law against violations should be something we need to emphasize on. So working with the trade, working with the employers, getting the message across that in an event I think Gabrielle referred to this, in an event that you're harassed, something, but that might look very innocent in itself, a harassment in one way or another, because it's unsolicited in most cases. So you'll see that the ILO obviously is working within the framework of the Spotlight Initiative, supporting these initiatives against violence and harassment. But also we partnered with the ministry in the putting together of the sexual harassment policy. But I think just to emphasize that once we get the member states ratifying the conventions, then everything else falls in place, because then you have legislation, because with legislation, then you can enforce and make sure that even when there's violation, there's a law that is there to enforce this, and working with the ministry, having labor inspectors, having a grievance procedure in place to ensure that those who are aggrieved against have voice and can then alert the responsible authority to take action against this. So these are some of the things we're doing, and we are looking forward to working. And the mere fact that we're talking here this thing shows also our commitment that we are prepared to work with all the partners here to do something against this very dangerous vice, if you may call that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zulu. And Dr. Hussain or Ms. Fingal, I wonder if you have any contributions to that question?
Yeah, I would like to say that I'm listening and I'm always thinking about these things, as Ms. Anisette said, and everyone else has said, that we may have policies and legislation and all these different documented things and the law behind it and so. But at the end of the day, I think we have to speak to the individual. I think Mr. Anisette said that as well. Often we find, I remember when we were doing the HIV and AIDS policy with the ILO, a lot of employers did not buy into it because they could not see a relationship between having this policy in the workplace, addressing HIV among their employees as anything to have to do with their business. And while it may result, there would have been a discrimination part to that, and that might have included some sort of disciplinary action. And even with sexual harassment, we have dealt with cases that resulted in disciplinary hearings and so. There is this element of seeing deeper than just the issue. Mm-hmm. Why is it so important that we eliminate sexual harassment in the workplace or anywhere? Because it's a human issue. It's about human beings feeling intimidated, feeling fearful, underachieving, and in society, there's that greater responsibility for us to want for each individual, each citizen, each human being to achieve what he or she can achieve, and to really attain the highest possible fulfillment in life. And to me, we have to start from there. And then we get into how does it impact business? Because until we get that, that common view, that we hold that common view and perspective that every single individual has the right to achieve in a particular environment, we would probably not see the relationship between the value of eliminating sexual harassment in the workplace. So there is something more esoteric, I think, behind it, or more humanitarian behind it, in addition to the legislation. Because at the end of the day, we can assess our society. Every time we read and hear of a female being killed by a spouse or an ex-spouse or some relationship person, it must really shake us, and I think it does. But how do we translate that in dealing with it as a workplace issue so that we see that it is urgent, it is necessary, and that we all have responsibility for it?
Thank you so much, Ms. Fingal. You raised some excellent points. Dr. Hussain, I don't know if you would like to add anything else.
Thanks so much, Asiya. To reiterate, the Equal Opportunity Commission is currently recommending amendments to the Equal Opportunity Act to include sexual harassment under sex as a category of discrimination, and as well to provide clear definitions of sexual harassment. We are also recommending that a duty be created for employers to promulgate a workplace code. We are also supporting separate sexual harassment legislation. It's creating a sort of family of protections for those who want to make complaints so that they have different channels. And as well, the Equal Opportunity Commission has provided guidelines for employers that are freely accessible on the website, and also can help employers with creating workplace sexual harassment policies. We continue to provide public education. We can be invited to speak. There's an alliance, it seems, of voices that are working towards a common end, and with employers, but also with workers, that the Equal Opportunity Commission is a part of. And I think it's important for us to keep in mind those who are generally excluded from protections and to not abide by that exclusion. And so from where I sit, I want to continue to recommend that sexual orientation be included as a protected status along with age and health status. And I also want to signal the fact that whatever their status in the country as unauthorized or undocumented, that migrants and migrant workers are amongst the most vulnerable to sexual harassment, whether in the streets, whether in seeking homes and housing, whether in seeking employment. And so while we work within the ambit of the law, and while I certainly speak within the remit of the EOC, I also want to encourage the population to know that we have to expand the boundaries of citizenship to include all of us in Trinidad and Tobago.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Hussain, particularly for the last part in terms of inclusion for migrants, for those who may be undocumented, and for those who find themselves more vulnerable, certainly to sexual harassment in the workplace. I'm always cognizant when we have panels like these ones, we have a viewing audience of tens of thousands of persons, some of whom right now may actually be experiencing or perpetrating sexual harassment and or violence in the workplace. So this next question is posed to the Ministry of Labor and also to the Equal Opportunity Commission. How can we identify sexual harassment or violence? How are they legally defined? And what are some of the consequences if they are not addressed or resolved? Yes, Ms. Gomez, please.
All right. Well, there's no legislation that really, in terms of we could say that this is the definition of sexual harassment. So we have a definition, as I said before, that was approved by the ILO, which we adopted in the policy. Now, someone asked, how can you say someone is sexual harassed because there are no witnesses, right? So now, when persons come before us in terms of having a complaint, and we try to question them to find out, we look for the elements in terms of whether quid pro quo or whether it's a hostile working environment, what transpired, after, if the, sometimes it could be, now, when we say a workplace policy, it doesn't mean that sexual harassment could occur strictly on the workplace. It could be an after-work line. It could be you're going on a outreach or something like that, a retreat. And, sometimes persons may give persons a lift to go back home. And, on the way back, certain questions are posed and whatever. So when that is rebuffed, then what happens? You have a hostile working environment. The environment is charged. Tasks may be taken away from you. You may be demoted. The person may start insulting you on the workplace. Now, these are actual cases I'm talking about that happen. Or you may find that the person is denied something. Either I get what I asked for, or you don't get your promotion, you don't get benefits are taken away from your allowances. You may find it difficult. So these are the elements that we look for in terms of identifying, what transpired after the advances were made to the individual. So we don't have, now in terms of what transpired after, in terms of low productivity, all these things we spoke about, absenteeism on the job, persons are being, an individual came to us because the employer refused to investigate it, and she had to, it was now, most of our cases we get from the security industry, very prevalent in security. And also, we have in the school environment, and somebody came and they were so stressed out. The person, they were actually saying that the person was aging because they couldn't get, the redress that they felt they deserve. So all these are, and that's why we stress for employers, to have EAP sessions. I mean, it could be for both the perpetrator and the person according to the gravity of the situation. And so it is something that sometimes when you hear the cases, it moves from a workplace issue to more of a criminal, the type of things that sometimes, some usually be, too much hearing the type of incidents that occur in the workplace. Sometimes it's too much.
So just to clarify, Ms. Gomez, sexual harassment, does it always have to be physical, or can it also be verbal and psychological?
Well, it could be verbal. It could be sending somebody a text message or WhatsApp message, It could be, sometimes you look and say whether or not did I entertain this person, because sometimes somebody may message you in the night, you're not on the job, the conversation become not work-related, and you may continue the chat and then things get out of hand, or it could be sometimes, somebody's being highly favored on the job, and, when things go awry, your job description will change, So all of these are things that are happening, they are live, they are real. And that is why it's so important that the educating the public, the general public, sometimes sessions like these are so important, to catch persons. And it has to be on an ongoing basis, because sometimes you would ask, have you heard? Are you aware? And they will tell you no, that, say, okay, what media do you listen to? Because you have to use different forms of media to catch the persons. Do you listen to radio? Do you, do you read? So, most persons would not read a policy. They won't pick it up and read it. So therefore, we have to be able to disseminate the information in a way that they could accept it, in a way that they could be educated, and in a way that it could become real to them, so they will know what to do. Right? So sometimes you have to be really creative in terms of because sometimes they would tell you, well, okay, I don't want to go forward, but then how do you survive in the workplace when this is happening?
Yeah.
You know, so sometimes, you know, we have to give them tools to empower them so that they could address it in the workplace. Okay, you will go back, you will do this, you will do that, you will say such, you know, you would write, you know. And so these are the tools of empowerment that we want to empower, especially a young woman, because sometimes, you know, employers, you feel that they profile a certain type of person. You know, you're limited in the education, you're very quiet, you're very shy, you come from a, you know, so those are the ones that they know that they would not speak up. They would suffer in silence. You know, sometimes a young woman came to the workplace, somebody brought her and said, okay, this is what is taking place with her, because she wouldn't speak.
Yes.
You know?
Thank you so much, Ms. Gomez. And we go to Dr. Hussein.
You know, if someone is watching this show, how would they know, how would they identify their experience of sexual harassment? And I think I want to get back again to the point that we know when things that are unwanted, we know when unwanted behavior or conduct is being imposed on us. We have an instinct for that. I really love that Ms. Gomez said that they were targeting schools, you know, to start creating a culture of prevention. And that is because we get so used to absorbing or remaining silent in the face of, or denying how we feel in the face of sexual harassment on the streets, in transportation, in schools, in, you know, in such a wide array of public spaces that by the time it gets to workplaces, we have not created a culture of zero tolerance. So if it is you are working in the high street shops in San Fernando or in the main road in Tunapuna, if it is you are, you know, working, and as Ms. Gomez said, very often young women, very often they are in non-unionized jobs as well. We have to remember there's a large non-unionized population of workers out there that are particularly vulnerable. And so if this is happening to you, I think you have to identify when you feel uncomfortable as your first point of knowledge of truth, and recognize and be able to say to somebody, listen, that those things being said to me, those compliments are unwanted. I don't know why they are saying them. Those jokes are inappropriate. They make me feel uncomfortable. I didn't want to give my number. I don't want to be texted. I don't want messages sent to me. I don't want memes sent to me. You know, the sexual harassment is so insidious. It is so subtle sometimes. And it also seeks to groom people by, you know, by making their complicity a source of their own silence. So if it is there are things being said to you, if it is there are advances being made to you, if there are promises for benefits being made to you, or threats if you don't return those advances, or jokes that make you uncomfortable, or calls or texts, those are all experiences that are common, that are real, and that are examples of sexual harassment. And you have a right to work in conditions that are safe and empowering. And so we all know that this is happening around the country. We all know we live in a culture in which the sexualization of women against their will is prevalent, of which sexual harassment is only one form. And so we know that there's a lot of work to do to say that workplaces are not places for us to exercise, the workplaces are not places for us to behave in inappropriate ways in terms of our sexual conduct, and that more than anything else, we have to be very attentive to what that means and transform workplace cultures, transform transportation paths, because women primarily are the groups using public transportation, and indeed transform the kinds of public discourse around sexual harassment so that victims are not seen as the ones who invite it, that the ones who perpetrate it are held accountable.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hussein. And now our final question for NATUC and ECA. So I'll take Mr. Anisat first and then Ms. Fingal. What is your vision for the workplace in terms of sexual harassment and violence in Trinidad and Tobago once the European Union, United Nations Spotlight Initiative is complete?
Well, from a NATUC perspective, we believe that gender-based violence, and supporting processes on the collective bargaining agenda must become necessary. We also look at the whole question of successfully negotiating within the collective agreement the whole question of a sexual harassment policy that is now part of a collective agreement that will allow you to use it through the dispute mechanism, taking it to the industrial court, because while we have some collective agreements, it is not widespread enough. And we believe that the whole question of educating men, and I want to emphasize that again, because we would have partnered with the Cipriani Labour College of Cooperative, and there's a reason for so doing, because we honestly believe that education is the equalizer, education is the tool, it's an opportunity, because no one can take education and knowledge away from you. And therefore, we also believe that men must become allies in this fight against sexual harassment in the workplace and even in the society. Another point that we believe that is necessary, which is not part of what we do, is to bring about in the workplace, awareness campaigns and exploring groundbreaking initiatives. What are those initiatives that I'm speaking about? For example, we think that electing union equality representatives. We believe that union women advocates independently trained by the union and recognized by the employer has to become part of this new DNA as it relates to industrial relations. We see the role of the employer and the trade union movement as pivotal in this exercise. And we believe that with the initiative through YOL and the ILO, that will allow itself for that kind of conversation, to start in the new conversation that is necessary to be adaptable to the realities that is in the workplace and outside of the workplace, because we see this as a societal problem. And therefore, you are empowering us by this initiative, and we hope that after the 3 years, we'll be able to transform the whole cultural thinking, that we will see the kind of transformation that is necessary to realize the goals that has been set by the ILO and also your body. That is how we see it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anisat. What a great vision for Trinidad and Tobago and for the workplace. And Ms. Fingal, would you have something to add?
Just like to add that I would see employers really buying into this sexual harassment and violence in the workplace policy, understanding that in implementing it, in promoting it, and in actually applying what is included in those provisions in those policies in their workplaces will redound to their benefit and to their employees' benefit. At the end of the day, as I was saying earlier, when we have productive employees, people who are able to realize their full potential, a business succeeds. And even if for that reason, there is that desire to change their culture and to really, promote a fair environment for women and a safe environment for women, I think we'll have succeeded to some extent. The other thing is what Mr. Anisat spoke about power and so earlier too. And I do know, and with all due regard to Mr. Anisat, we have this what is called difficult situation where sometimes an employee who goes to a union representative to address an issue might have a sexual advancement experience with the very union person. And that is something as well that happens. So that we have to really hope that in working with SANIS, I spoke of the union, working with the ECA, that really is a holistic approach and all stakeholders supporting each other. The employers on their own and having the policy will not work because you need the union to also live up to their the requirements of their responsibilities. And also for employees to know that I think key among the issues we want communicated will be that the victim is not to be seen, that person must not see themselves as the cause or contributing, that people must now identify that I am the victim and I need help. I am the one who should be given the support. And that is another element of it that I feel we have to focus on, and for the employer to accept that and to really want to do what is expected through the policies and the legislation that will come into place.
Thank you so much, Ms. Fingal, for bringing that important point to our attention. Today's discussion was indeed quite productive. We learned more about the ILO's C-190 Convention on Violence and Harassment, the National Workplace Policy on Sexual Harassment in Trinidad and Tobago, and the Equal Opportunity Commission's guidelines on sexual harassment. We also received pertinent information on identifying sexual harassment and how businesses and organizations can work to implement these policies. We think about all those who have experienced or are experiencing sexual harassment and encourage you to speak out and utilize methods available to you for legal recourse. And we think of all those who may be perpetrating sexual harassment and what we need to do to eliminate sexual harassment and violence from the workplace. Thank you to all our panelists for your very informative perspectives. We are definitely catalysts and agents of change in the right direction to eliminate violence and sexual harassment in the workplace. We will now close today's session with a short video from UNFPA's Executive Director, Dr. Natalia Kanem, launched on November 25th to commemorate the United Nations International Day to Eliminate Violence Against Women and the start of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence.
Enough. That's what we say today and every day to all forms of violence against women and girls. Enough to domestic violence. Enough to rape. Enough to harmful practices, such as female genital mutilation and child marriage. And enough to impunity for one of the most pervasive violations of human rights. Women and girls everywhere have a right to live free from violence. Today, on the International Day to End Violence Against Women, we remind the world of that right and mark the start of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. COVID-19 reveals all the ways we need to think differently and act differently. Let's put saying enough to violence at the top of the list. One word to transform our world. Enough.
You can continue to follow our joint European Union, United Nations Spotlight Initiative panels at the United Nations Trinidad and Tobago's Facebook page. Thank you and good afternoon.